My name is Bry Sargent, and I have been a workplace safety professional for nearly 20 years, and I have coached and trained over 100 safety managers. It is my passion to talk to you about management support, the psychology of safety, and building a safety culture. Today, we are talking about safety being more about psychology than it is management. So I've been doing safety now for about 20 years. And that's one of the things that I realized is that so many people focus on regulations. Like if you go into a lot of the trainings and a lot of the Facebook groups out there and all of that good stuff, what you see is a lot of people talking about regulations. And regulations are all good. They're the foundation of what we do. But if you actually focus more on behaviors and on the psychology of why people do the things that they do, you have a bigger impact to the point that regulations just fall into place anyway. And unfortunately, a lot of people just focus on regulations and they end up just building programs that are C grades and not A plus grades. And I actually talk about this in my free course. So if you haven't had an opportunity to take it yet, you can go to thesafetygeek.com/free course. And I talk about that there. The biggest results that you can get in your safety program is when you focus on psychology and trying to change those behaviors. And it all starts with understanding that the behaviors that you're seeing, your employees do, your management team do, that's just human nature. And it's a lot harder to change psychology, which is why we tend to focus on regulations, right? That's kind of the easy thing. It's easy to get that C grade. But in order to get it to where people are having safety habits and they're doing the right thing at all times and all of that, you have to get them to change their underlying beliefs and their underlying habits. So that becomes a lot more difficult. And a couple of years ago, I was heading back to school to finish up my degree, and I had a choice, right? I had been doing safety at that time for about 15 years. And I said, should I go for a safety degree? Because at that time, you can now get one online. Or should I look at something else? When I looked at my local universities, it was like, oh, psychology. And when I looked at like industrial organizational psychology, it's all about motivation and teamwork and personalities and diversity and all of those things. So I kind of went that route because I felt that it would give me a more well-rounded leadership and management style, which I believe it did, but that's just me. Psychology is actually about the science of behavior and the science of the mind. So keep that in mind. That's the psychology part of it. The safety management part of it is managing business activities and applying principles, frameworks, processes, and everything to help prevent accidents, injuries, and to minimize other risks. How are you going to apply these principles and frameworks? How are you going to get people to follow those principles and frameworks without the psychology? What safety managers tend to do is they focus on regulations, they focus on claims, and they focus on writing policies and just expect everybody to follow the policy because it's written, it's now the law, right? But what our overall goal really is in writing those policies and following those regulations is to identify hazards and to eliminate them through safe work practices and to build safety habits and to make safety a core value. Those are our goals. So if you see the difference, our goals are more psychology related than management related. It's almost like we want to reach the psychology goal, but in order to get there, we're using these management tools, which is fine. You know, it's all good. And if you think about it, we have the hierarchy of controls, and the hierarchy of controls states that we, eliminate the hazard first, and then we look at substituting it, and then we look at engineering it out. Those are all management practices. And then next we have administrative controls, which are your policies or procedures, which are kind of management practices, but you have to have the psychology there in order to get people to follow it. And then PPE, which, yes, it's a management practice, but at the same time, if they don't have the habit of using that PPE, it's going to be harder to get them to follow that, right? So you have to have that combination when it comes to your administrative controls and your PPE. So I think a lot of safety managers are lacking that understanding of the power of psychology. So if you actually look at your training and you focus more on like half of it regulations and half of it psychology, you'll be a lot more well-rounded and you'll be better at your job. I want to give you 5 psychology principles and how they can apply to safety. And I'm not going to give you all the details. So I want you to take these 5 principles and go out and do some more research and think to yourself, how does this apply to what I do? Number one, it is habits and habit building. There are some great books out there about how to build habits. My favorite is Atomic Habits by James Clear. There's also The Power of Habits, and I cannot remember the author of that one. But habits are created by repeatedly doing something. You are what you repeatedly do. So if you think about it, you drive to work every single day. And at first, when you first got the job, you had to pay attention to where you were driving. But then after a while, you're driving to work the same time every single morning. You've done this, where all of a sudden you pull into the parking lot or even your parking space and you can barely even remember making the turns. That's because when habits are first formed, they're formed in your prefrontal cortex of your brain. But as you do them over and over again, the neural networks get stronger and they actually transfer to the lower part of your brain. So like the brainstem area, or to just areas where like the neural network is so freaking fast, you can do it without even thinking. So for safety, we want to build safety habits. We want your employees to have the habits of always using their PPE, of always hooking up, of always, paying attention to safety and looking, safety awareness, right? How do you get those habits in place? It's you are what you repeatedly do. And same goes, this is kind of a caveat on that, is that you believe what you repeatedly think too. So if they repeatedly think that safety is a joke, then that's going to be their belief. But if they repeatedly believe that safety is there to protect them, it's going to work, then that's going to be their belief. So you have to kind of work on that both ways. Number two is attribution error. And I love the attribution error theory. And what this states is that we tend to blame the person for the problem as opposed to the situation that that person is in. But when we think about ourselves, we always look at the situation that we're in before our personal attributes. So how does this play a role in safety? So when we look at why things are wrong or why people messed up, we're immediately looking at the person first. This is why your accident investigations tend to always come out with they're not following policies or procedures, or they're horseplaying, or they didn't follow the rules, or they were stupid, or something like that, right? That's an attribution error. So you have to actively look at the situation that they're in first and say, what's wrong with that environment? What's wrong with that situation, to come up with the real cause of that problem. And that's how you're going to find better root causes too, and root causes that you can actually do something about. And you'll see this a lot. And when you talk to other employees and say, why do you think this accident happened? A lot of times they will say, well, he just wasn't paying attention. It would never happen to me. That's an attribution error because they're looking at the person and not the situation. So the way to change this is you just want to develop the skills. You are what you repeatedly do. So if you repeatedly think, let me look at the situation first, you're actually going to change your brain and you're going to be looking at the environment before you look at the personality of the person or the personal attributes of the person. Number 3, this one I really like. This is the expectancy value theory. And what expectancy value theory states is that we don't work towards goals if we don't believe that they could be reached, even if the value of that goal is extremely high. So when they studied this, and this was an amazing study, not safety related, but all related to safety, they did a study of the attractiveness of people, right? And how often they were asked out or flirted with. And it was found that the higher attraction someone is, and like the difference, right? So you have the person asking them out and the attractive person. Well, let's say that you had someone whose attractiveness rating was like a 5, and they were looking at or attracted to a person who was a 9, right? And the bigger that difference, the less likely it was that they were going to be asked out. It was really interesting. So you have this whole group of attractive people that were not getting flirted with and they were not getting asked out. And why is that? It's because the person with the low value who was doing the rating was like, it's never going to happen, so I might as well not even try. And this brings me to another saying that I love. It's actually on my coffee cup. I wish I had it here. I would show it to you. It's by Norman Peale. And his saying is that you always shoot for the moon, because even if you miss, you land amongst the stars. So even if the goal seems unreachable, the journey to get to the goal is going to pay off, right? You're going to get something out of it. But what you have to realize with yourself and with your employees, that if the goal just seems too unreachable, they're not going to try. So how can we put this into safety? So the minute I read the study, I was immediately thinking, I think about safety with everything. I'm just like a total geek that way. But if you think about it, you're creating an incentive program that has way too many moving parts. They're just going to be like, I'm never going to get it, so why even try? Or if you are doing a raffle and it's like one winner out of 1,000, not even going to try to get my name into that hat. Or you can also do this with your goal setting of saying like, hey, we're currently at like 60% compliance. We want to get to 100% compliance. And they just look like, yeah, that's never going to work. You're pie in the sky. We're not even going to look at that. Right. So that's how expectancy value theory plays into safety. That's why we need to do everything in little baby steps. So if you're at 60% compliance, you need to set the goal to 65 or even 63 and then celebrate when you get there, because that is a reachable goal. And this is why I hear a lot of people say that like 0 is impossible. 0 is obviously not impossible because plenty of businesses and industries achieve it. But a lot of people think 0 is impossible because they're currently at like a 5 or a 6 OSHA recordable rate. And they're like, yeah, I'll never get down to a 0. Well, I had a processing plant, a food processing plant that sat at 0 for 5 years. And the industry average for food processing was like a 5.5 or something like that. So it is possible. You just have to believe it. And they had gotten to the point, like once they had hit 0 for like 2 years, then it was just expected. They just expected to stay at 0. So when you have that expectation of like, yeah, no one's ever going to get hurt here, then everybody acts differently. So it's just setting that expectation. All right. Number 4 is the conformity and the bystander effect. So what this states is that people are less likely to help a victim if there are other people around. So you would think that if you were in a crowded room and somebody was getting mugged, everybody would jump in and stop them. Studies have shown that you are less likely to get help as opposed to it being one-on-one. So let's say you were walking down the street and it's one other person on the street and then they start getting mugged. You are more likely to help that person than if there were 20 other people on that street. And how this study came about was actually that very similar situation. It was in a city and a woman was getting mugged and it was in a crowded apartment complex. And everybody was looking out the window, but everybody thought somebody else was going to do something and they did nothing. And she ended up getting stabbed and being left for dead. So when they went back and did the study on it and talked to everybody, everybody said, well, I thought somebody else would call. And nobody called the police. So then they expanded it further. They did other studies with fires and smoke and how quickly people responded. And that's what they found out, is that when there are other people around, they are less likely to help. Let's put this into a safety context. Let's say that you have 15 people working and one person is doing something wrong or unsafe. Your 14 other people are less likely to say something to that person. And how many times have you had an accident investigation where you were just like, why didn't you guys say something? I actually had an employee have her fingers mutilated one time, and everybody knew that the machine was defective, but nobody reported it because they thought someone else reported it, and that we already knew about the defect in this machine. And it ended up costing somebody her fingers. They didn't get amputated, but they were pretty badly mutilated because nobody knew that this machine was defective. So it's that same mentality. So how do you fix this when it comes to safety? So I want you to research this further, but what I would say is you need that one hero, because what the study shows is as long as one person comes forward and starts to help, or they say something, they report something, they do something, all the others will jump in too, or most of the others will jump in. So you need to get people to be heroes. And the way you do that is you praise them, you recognize them, all of that good stuff when they do it. And you encourage them to be that person that speaks up. This is the whole theory behind anti-bullying too. Schools are teaching anti-bullying and they're just teaching, just speak up. You don't even really have to interact. You just have to speak up. So you just have to train your employees to speak up. The last one is the Good Samaritan. I'm not sure if it's called a theory or a hypothesis or something, but it's about Good Samaritans. Kind of going back to the conformity and the bystander effect, but not really the same. So this is the way this study went, is that they wanted to know what would make people stop and help other people. So they had these theology students and they told them, you're going to give a talk on being a good Samaritan and what you need to do to be a good Samaritan. So they had them practice in one building, but they were giving the talk in another building. And as they were walking from one building to the next, they actually put a person there that needed help, maybe a homeless person, somebody injured, something like that, right? And then they judged how often the people actually stopped to help that person. These are theology students, okay? And you know what they found? It was most of the time they didn't stop. So they started tweaking it, trying to figure out what the difference was and what would make them stop. And it came to time constraints. If you are short on time, or you are busy, or you feel overloaded, you are less likely to help another person. Let's say you have that group of workers again, 15 of them, and one of them isn't following it right, but everybody is super busy. They're not going to take the time to correct that one person. They're not going to take the time to be that hero. So this is where quotas or being paid on piecemeal and all of that too, that's where that comes into play. Because when you have quotas or you're being paid on piecemeal, your employees are less likely to help other people. This is the disadvantage of doing that. So, the company sees it as an advantage, right? Because they're like, oh, we're going to make so many more widgets, but they don't see the cost of making those widgets because you're going to hurt safety and quality by doing that. What you need to do is try to somehow express this to your management team and to get people to slow down. And I actually did a video one time, or I saw a video one time where, we had them do it slower. We had them do the task slower and follow the SOP exactly. Then we had them do it their way. And it actually showed that they finished the job more efficiently doing it slower because you make less mistakes. So that was habits, attribution error, expectant value theory, conformity and bystander effect, and then the Good Samaritan hypotheses, I think it is, might be theory. I'm not really sure. Check those out. Be sure that you look into them further. I know when I was researching them, it was just setting off light bulbs like crazy about how I could apply this in my workplace. Now I could take each one, and I would recommend you do each one separately and try to put processes in place that would help improve their behaviors. But anyway, if you like this stuff and you want to dive deeper into, talking about safety management or safety culture or employee involvement, then make sure that you get on my email list. I'm always sending out notifications and good exclusives, and I will let you know when Safety Management Academy is opening, and you can go to the safetygeek.com/free course. Other than that, I will see you next week. Bye-bye.